He's smart because he's figuring out how to build the bombs better as time goes on. There's an amazing meticulous quality to the bombs. They were very cleverly done.
The bomber has been moving. The targets have been different. Most cases don't go on this length of time without some sort of solution.
Up to about the middle 80s, I thought the situation was hopeless. I thought there was nothing that could be done to prevent the technological system from going the way it was. All my monkey wrenching activities were simply anger and revenge, I'll tell you frankly. To me, I felt that I was almost completely alone in this respect.
So far, he hasn't killed anyone. He's clearly trying to.
The next package was sent May 15th, 1985. That was discovered at the University of California at Berkeley.
He's back to Berkeley. Is that significant? Why did this person feel comfortable coming back to this campus again?
Zap! You know, it exploded, threw my hand over to the side. I could see my hand was really torn up very badly. Then I noticed that I had this big gash out of my arm and blood was starting to bubble up out of there.
I respond to the crime scene along with other members of the San Francisco FBI office. It is, as with most bombings, a rather horrific scene. There is debris all over the room. There is blood.
I also had my Air Force Academy ring on my right ring finger. And when I opened the device, it blew my fingers and the ring off and left an imprint in the wall itself.
Man, now what has man done? Man can't stand himself where he's told that he belongs. Man don't understand. Man blames everyone under the sun. Tell me, what is man become? Man can't help himself, don't know where he can run. Man can't run for help, can't stand anybody else. Man don't know where he's from, don't know where he belongs. How would man trade tomorrow for a time long forgotten?
No, it was simply anger and revenge, and I was going to strike back. Try not to get blown up.
What is man become?
It's kind of odd. He's putting clues inside. He punches a little stamps FC into the bomb material, or he puts it on a little plate.
No one knows what it means. These are just two initials. There's a great deal of speculation and investigation to try to figure out what this could mean. There are all kinds of ideas presented within the task force and outside the task force as to what FC could stand for.
This is a guy who is really paying attention to his craft. The bits that he left in his bombs, referring to the FC and the wood references that he makes, Percy wood, and the bits of wood used in his bomb. He was probably too vain, and I thought he was too clever to avoid it, but they're clues.
Does the Unabomber mean anything to you? No. Do the initials FC mean anything to you? No, only in terms of a DOS command, you know, nothing there that I could think of.
We pursued it as far as it could be pursued to see if it meant something, and it was another dead end.
I'm no longer bothered by having crippled this guy. I laughed at the idea of having any compunction about crippling an airline pilot.
Thousands and thousands of pages, 22,000 pages of handwritten material, entries about what he'd been doing on a particular day, to things he was eating, to his history, people he knew, jobs he'd had, to experiments about how to make bombs.
I think that perhaps I could now kill someone. I emphasize that my motivation is personal revenge. My ambition is to kill a scientist, big businessman, government official, or the like.
It's the world that was inside his head. Nobody would have been able to see that.
There were entries that were entirely just mathematical, just numerical entries, pages and pages of numbers. And it turned out a key within the writings allowed translation of these numerical documents. Those turned out to be direct confessions to all of the Unabomber crimes and how he felt about them. So he had gone to great lengths to write them in a code such that if anybody stumbled into the cabin, burglar or whomever, they wouldn't be able to make anything out of it.
You studied math,
Yeah.
right? Why?
I just get hit out. I enjoy it.
Really? How interesting.
Yeah. Pure mathematics is useless from a practical point of view, and that's what I studied. I mean, a lot of people don't understand what mathematicians really do. You know, they think they sit there adding up columns of figures or something like that. But that isn't what it is. It's more like puzzle solving.
Yeah.
Butch didn't know he had a college degree. He knew he was smart. I mean, Ted would come up here and help him work on the house. And the math he could do in his head was phenomenal. You have to do a lot of math to know how to do the lumber. So I always was impressed with Butch's knowledge of math. He said Ted was so much faster than him that he knew he had to be an educated man.
Sometimes he would tutor me in mathematics because he was very, very gifted in mathematics. I'm remembering one time I was probably in 4th grade and he's trying to show me how to do algebra. And I'm thinking, I don't really understand this. And my parents are saying, you know, Teddy, I don't think David really understands. And Teddy says, yeah, he does. You understand, don't you, Dave? And I said, yeah, I think so.
I think one of the reasons that he gravitated towards math is something he could do in isolation. It's not a team project.
And so this young guy counselor in school decided I should skip it. And it was a disaster because there was not accepted by me. And this generated a breakthrough resentment over her. And I would have left her if you were going to revenge and so on.
There were parts of him that were a little different. He was a little, I don't know how to describe it. Ted did not have many friends. There were periods of time when nobody ever came to the house to visit Ted.
His adolescence is now troubled. I wouldn't say it's necessarily traumatic, but it's troubled. It's the beginning.
I actually asked Mom, what's wrong with Teddy? And you know, Mom's saying, what do you mean? There's nothing wrong with Teddy. What are you talking about? And I said, well, he doesn't have any friends. I mean, why? It was at that point that Mom decided she needed to share something with me so that I could hopefully understand my brother better. And this was a memory that had haunted her really all her life. As Mom described it, he originally, you know, he was like a laughing, active baby. He had gotten sick. Like good parents, they took him to the hospital. He ended up being in the hospital for over a week as they tried to diagnose what the problem was. There were rashes on his body. Mom always faulted the hospital. They would have been there every day visiting him, but the hospital said no. It's kind of like we don't want parents to be in the way. We got our work to do. We have our little baby to cure, so keep your distance. They were only allowed to visit him 2 times a week for 2 hours. After that, he was completely shut down. There was no smiling, the eye contact was no longer there. She and our father tried it took him a couple of weeks after Ted came home from the hospital to get him to the point where he would seem to trust a little bit and make some eye contact.
There is this theory that an infant that doesn't bond with the mother develops psychopathy as a defensive mechanism, that they feel no pain, they feel no trauma, but of course at the same time, they lose the sense of empathy, a moral compass.
At the tail end of that conversation, she said, you know, Ted may have felt abandoned as a little baby. Don't ever abandon your brother, David, because that's what he fears the most. And of course, I'm thinking, well, I'll never abandon Ted. Why would I abandon Ted? I love Ted. But of course, those words echoed in my mind years and years later when we had to deal with Ted's violence.
People today are excessively afraid of pain and death. If the system does break down, with or without the help of the revolutionaries, there's going to be a lot of violence, and what sort of a dilemma does this pose for nonviolent radicals?
He's clever, really meticulous, probably obsessive compulsive, fastidious, and super smart.
There is an indication that the bomber has some familiarity with construction techniques and has access to machine tools. They're getting better in that sense.
I was up on a job that I was working, so nobody was home. And the UPS driver come roaring up into the driveway, and Ted was inside of an open-ended shed. And I have a little workbench in there with the drill press and, you know, files, different drill bits. There's a vise, and here was Ted. He had nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. And I asked the UPS driver after, well, what was he working on? And he said, well, I didn't see. He put his body right in front of the vise, whatever he was working on there. And I said, well, what was his body language like? He said, consternation. You know, very serious face, and Chris isn't home.
I just think we should have been more observant. In this community, you help your neighbor, but you also give them their space.
He was so reclusive and secretive that there's just really no way we could have gone from the hermit in the cabin to the Unabomber. It's just such a far stretch.
I almost always succeeded in avoiding meeting people in the woods. I would keep off the trails and keep toward the most isolated parts.
His clothing was ripped and tattered, and still hair wild, eyes wild.
Filthy dirty. Just the layers of dirt on his skin was like crusted.
I had these old dirty ragged clothes on, and I took a baseball cap and I put a neck cloth on it. So I could take the neck cloth and button it over to the side so it would cover the lower part of my face. So here I was walking down this trail. I had a bedroll slung over my shoulder, and I had a canteen hanging here and a bottle of cooking oil hanging here, and I had a rifle slung in the crook of my arm, you know, and I'm striding down this trail. And all of a sudden, I meet him coming in the opposite direction. A couple of kids, it looked like college kids, you know, out on a field trip or something like that. And here I am with a rifle over my arm, my face covered. And so some of these kids wouldn't think I was a bandit or something. You know, I pulled the thing down, you know, so it would not cover my face anymore. And he said, hi. And he sort of looked at me and said, hi.
One thing that really sticks out to me in my memory, there was one day where I was walking up to our rock quarry, which I did frequently, and just taking a walk by myself. And I rounded a corner. There was Ted, and we almost just ran into each other. And it startled both of us. At that point, I just remember being scared. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew something was wrong, something was out of place. Not a word was said, and I remember just almost running back home and constantly looking over my shoulder to see if he was still there. I was truly fearful of him.
We began trying to figure out ways to match up now these different geographic areas. So you have a series of bombs in Chicago, Utah, and now Northern California. Bombs are being placed and mailed from these locations. So the bomber has to be physically there. Are there data sets that you can acquire that you could begin filtering to look for somebody who follows this pattern? No one has seen the bomber, but we have behavioral experts who give us their assessments. And one of the things that's most likely is that the bomber is a white male between 35 and 45 who is at least comfortable on university campuses, perhaps works at a university campus. All these things taken together mean that you can begin to paint a picture of the person who is doing this.
It did detonate. It caused injuries to the assistant, the grad assistant that opened the package, and some temporary hearing loss by both Professor McConnell and the assistant.
I remember very specifically a sense of the package expanding in my hands.
There's got to be a reason that the bomber is choosing these people. Does he know them? Do they represent something to him? What is the connection that's making him pick these people out of the universe of people that he could use for his devices?
I was in Ann Arbor, and that's how I became involved in the case. I was doing a lot of investigation regarding Professor McConnell, trying to figure out, basically doing what we call a victimization, where you try to figure out who he might be in contact with or for what reason somebody would send him a bomb, and what the connection was between McConnell and the previous victims, and we weren't coming up with much.
Dr. McConnell is a professor of psychology. That is a new element to the case. Why now? We have what appears to be a clear connection to universities and the airline industry, but now a psychologist. What does that mean? It must mean something, but that's left for us to figure out what.
Some traditional Michigan activities, curricular and extracurricular.
Ted was accepted into Michigan when he graduated from Harvard. He got here in 1962. He stayed at Michigan until 1967 when he got his PhD in mathematics. And for the first 3 years he was here, he lived in East Quad right here. We know a lot about what Ted was thinking. He hand-wrote a very voluminous journal. This is what he wrote. During my years at Michigan, I occasionally began having dreams Some psychologist would either be trying to convince me that I was sick or would be trying to control my mind. I would grow angrier, and finally I would break out in physical violence. At the moment when I killed the psychologist, I experienced a great feeling of relief and liberation.
It was pretty obvious that he had some psychological problems that were pretty serious. I think in some ways, you know, the family was, okay, let's not talk about it. Let's let things settle down, and then we'll recover normalcy. You know, it was significant enough that, you know, probably we should have sought help then.
According to his diary, those were not happy times for him. He apparently had issues with his social awkwardness, and I think it was a turning point for him in a lot of ways in his thinking about his interaction with society.
There was a certain point in which I was reaching a crisis, and I just felt so desperate. My heart was so empty, I felt, and I just reached the crisis and felt so desperate that I felt that I no longer cared about it.
He had difficulties with the opposite sex, and ultimately that manifested itself into some thoughts about actually killing people. He became that angry. I think maybe initially with himself and ultimately with society, because he felt that he was a victim to some extent.
He writes he was at the library and there was a girl there that he chatted with, and he had a desire to spend more time to connect with her, and she seemed available.
He talks about trying to get up the nerve to call her, and ultimately, he never makes the call. He said something derogatory about the female, and I think that says something about, you know, Ted's maybe feeling of inadequacy.
At the very end of his last year in Michigan, for about 2 weeks, he had been having erotomanic fantasies about being a woman. Now, it's not that Ted wanted to be a woman. There wasn't any kind of gender dysphoria. Ted fantasized about being a woman because I think he couldn't have relationships with women. He'd never had an experience with a woman. So for whatever reason, he wanted a sex change.
So he made an appointment to go see the University of Michigan psychologist at the health service, and he went to see them, and at the last minute decided he didn't want to talk about having a sex change.
He decided he couldn't go through with it. He couldn't talk about his erotomanic fetishes. He couldn't talk about his desire for a sex change. He described feeling extreme violent anger towards the psychiatrist, feelings of rage and shame and humiliation. And in 1966, this is where Ted begins to fantasize about killing.
And so I said to myself, why not really kill that psychiatrist and anyone else whom I hate?
All of his anger bubbles to a point where it's no longer contained. Just thinking about the homicides, writing in his diary, all of this provided him with a sense of relief and also sexual satisfaction. Ted describes leaving this appointment as a major turning point in his life. In fact, he said, "Like a phoenix, I burst from the ashes of my despair to a glorious new hope."
I will kill, but I will make at least some effort to avoid detection so that I can kill again.
He didn't do it for a while after that, but that's when he first thought of it, of actually killing human beings.
It is typical. The majority of serial killers don't start killing the second they get the inclination to. They wait, they think, they plan. Especially somebody like Ted, who is so methodical, so thoughtful, so calculating. He wasn't gonna kill right away. And he didn't express those thoughts to anybody, not to family, not to friends. He wrote them in his diary, but that's private. So how would you have been able to see whether or not Ted was going to be a homicidal offender?
We didn't know, of course, nobody knew what was waiting for Ted. It kind of looked like, wow, Ted's future is bright, it's open, it's beautiful. I remember a picture of my brother in which he's not quite looking at the camera, he's looking off to the side, and I saw, wow, he's looking into the future. A future maybe only he can see, you know? This hopeful vision of a future that would be full of accomplishment and good works. I think the first really awful crisis we experienced as brothers was when I got a job working in the same factory that my father worked at, and I was living at home, and Ted said he wanted to earn some money. He came back to work in the same factory.
I would periodically leave for periods of a couple of weeks to a few months to get a job somewhere and earn some money to get by. The last time I had a job, I spent a year, approximately a year in the Chicago area working.
Something really surprised me. He asked one of the girls there to go out with him, and she started going out with him. They had 3 or 4 dates, and he came back seeming really happy. I mean, he even told me, burst into my room one day and said, she kissed me. And then after a few dates, the girl said that she really wasn't romantically interested, that maybe they could be friends. And Ted was extremely upset. He wrote these limericks that he, very unflattering, ugly sort of limericks about her, and he posted them around the work site. I confronted him. I said, why are you doing this? And he said, you don't know what she did to me. And I said, I basically threatened him that I would fire him because I had a small little job as a supervisor there. And sure enough, the next day, he came back and put another one of the limericks up. So, are you going to fire me? And I said, yeah, Ted, go home.
After he had been fired from his brother's factory, he ended up waiting in that woman's car. He had contemplated mutilating her, but decided against it.
There are a lot of elements of Kaczynski that are hyper-masculine.
There are women who write to me just because there are women who just think that high-profile prisoners are attractive and they want a personal relationship with them. And they send me pictures of themselves and tell me about their, personal feelings and things like that.
In my opinion, he hated women. He had no use for us. Butch was a bachelor, so his house was a little messy. So the first, 2 weeks or so, I was just kind of cleaning up, and I was just stinking around. I was 23. Wasn't wearing many clothes. I turned around, and there's this nasty-looking guy peeping through our plant window, and I'm like, what the heck? So I run into the bathroom, and I throw some clothes on, and I'm like, why didn't Butch teach me how to shoot a gun yet? It was Ted. He wanted to know what day it was and what time it was, and he was very polite, but it was like, this is really weird that you would, want to know what day it was and what time it was.
Ted had such an ideal situation with my place because he could sit across in total hiding and peer out from behind a big gravel pile and trees growing out of it, and he could sit and watch. He could sit and watch my wife, jump into the hot tub with me. He would watch. I mean, that sounds like a silly thing, but it does change things. You feel violated, that your privacy has been taken away from you, and now you no longer trust, well, is he there or is he not there?
Just like Ted Kaczynski continually improved on his bombs, a sexual serial killer will continually improve on his rapes and abductions of women. And so it's an addiction. And definitely that repetitive pattern we certainly see in Kaczynski's bomb making. I think the bombs were his sex.
So if you keep having enough of these devices, sooner or later someone will get killed. They're that good. It's not just a worry, it's a belief. They just haven't had the right set of circumstances for anyone to die yet.
"38-year-old Hugh Scruton died when he spotted a paper bag by a dumpster at the back of his store. When he picked up the device, it exploded. Debris was blown through the walls of the building. Shrapnel was strewn 150 yards into a back parking lot."
Hugh Scruton was a student at UC Berkeley at the time that Kaczynski was teaching there. And I think there's a good chance Scruton wound up on Kaczynski's victim list because he'd caught his eye somehow.
The good part about teaching was teaching the few students who were really interested in the subject, and the bad part was teaching the rest.
He didn't forget anything. Someone offended him some way or another. I would not doubt that they wound up on his victim list.
Excellent. Humane way to eliminate somebody. He probably never felt a thing.
He expressed pleasure because he had been able to increase the power of his bombs as he became, smarter with each one. And so it's kind of chilling, and there is no tone of remorse. It is more pleasure in improving his skills at killing people.
You've had 4 devices in 1985, 1 with a fatality. Everybody, of course, is expecting that the pace will pick up.
In order to put the FBI off their track, he deliberately went to a men's room in the bus station, picked up a number of pubic hairs, and brought them back and inserted them in his next bomb so that when the FBI did their analysis of the bombing, that they would find DNA strands that had nothing to do with him.
February 20th, 1987, another bomb was found in the parking area of a computer store in Salt Lake City, Utah.
I noticed there was this piece of wood sitting kind of next to the building between the cars where I'd park. One of my employees saw him place the device in the parking lot. Didn't know it was a device, obviously. She got busy, the office got busy, and it was just like, it's a piece of wood, whatever. There were 4 nails sticking out of this piece of wood, and I was thinking to myself, that's kind of odd, but it was only a second, I just hesitated for a second. I reached down, I put my fingers on the ends, on the bottom piece, and when I lifted it, it sounded almost like a fighter jet, just a screech. And I thought, oh God, I might not make it. Everything went into slow motion, and the only way I can describe it is like, if you think about the Matrix, when he's dodging bullets and things like that. And I noticed these things that looked like needles, kind of, that were threaded through my shirt.
When you make a pipe bomb, the explosion will take the path of least resistance. And the pipe actually expands like a balloon to a point when then it bursts. And the pipe itself becomes shrapnel. And then if you surround it with additional shrapnel, it makes it extremely deadly.
You can see where the pieces of shrapnel tracked directly along my face. You can see where it came in to my chin, through the lower lip, under the upper lip. The piece of metal that embedded below my nose, had it been out a fraction of an inch, probably would have gone straight in the brain. The guy before me was killed with the same bomb, just in a different package. I was experiment 121. I'm reading journal entries from what he calls experiments. My device detonated, but the results, as far as we could find out, did not do enough to satisfy us. This is a picture of my left leg. I mean, I'm looking at, lots of different sizes of pieces, but, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I mean, that's one small section, so I'm gonna take a guess that there's maybe 50 or so pieces of shrapnel on the one side of the leg.
A bomb is so impersonal. Unless you're physically there, you can't actually see it. You can't see the person suffer. You can't see the pain.
Common question asked of all serial killers, well, what did it feel like to kill someone? And most serial killers say the same thing. Didn't feel anything.
As investigators, you cannot help but want to end this before it happens to the next person, and to give to the people who've been victimized some sense of an answer to why this happened. Why was his store chosen? He's probably asking himself that, but we don't have any good answers for them at this point.
The part that just becomes so weird is why, and then why, and why again, right? Would somebody try to kill you? Because it did come down to somebody tried to kill you and they're a murderer. So why would they do that to you?
What's different about this is that for the first time in the case, the bomber is seen. It's huge. An employee inside the store notices some sort of movement through the window. They exchange looks for a couple of seconds, perhaps. He finishes what he's doing and walks away. Immediately, the task force, the authorities there, set to work creating a sketch of what the person had seen.
He was wearing a hoodie, a hooded sweatshirt, and aviation sunglasses.
Now investigators are able to derive the first police sketches of the elusive killer, a mustached man, apparently in his late 20s.
So everybody is speculating what he's like, including, law enforcement. It's of course, it's a feeding frenzy for the media. Who is the Unabomber?
This man is one of the most wanted criminals in America. He's a white man, 5 foot 10 inches tall with reddish blonde hair, but no one knows his name.
According to this witness's description, the Unabomber had reddish blonde hair, and this description was massively publicized, according to which the Unabomber had reddish blonde hair. Obviously inconvenient in that my hair is brown instead of blonde.
The FBI hopes that someone in the Northern California, San Francisco area the bomber is believed to live in will recognize this man and turn him in.
Now what has man done? Man can't stand himself or where he's told that he belongs. Man don't understand. Man blames everyone under the sun. Tell me, what is man become? Man can't help himself.